The Jedi Order is often remembered through the lens of its most famous figures, those whose names are etched into history, whose deeds shaped the rise and fall of empires. The galaxy speaks of Yoda's wisdom, Obi-Wan Kenobi's resilience, Anakin Skywalker's tragic descent. These names dominate the stories passed from one generation to the next, defining what it means to be a Jedi. Yet the Order was built upon far more than a handful of legends. For every Jedi whose name is spoken, there are countless others whose sacrifices have been lost to time. They fought, they suffered, they endured, yet their legacies remain buried beneath the weight of grander tales. It is a strange thing, the way history chooses what to remember and what to forget. The most dramatic battles, the most powerful warriors, the most devastating betrayals, these are the moments preserved in stories. But what of those who stood in the shadows, the Jedi whose impact was measured not in great victories, but in quiet moments of defiance? Their names do not appear in the records of the Jedi Council. Their stories are not retold in the archives, yet their choices shape the fate of the galaxy as much as any duel between Sith and Jedi, any prophecy of balance, any war waged in the name of peace. The Order was not only warriors and diplomats, but seekers, wanderers, scholars, and protectors. Some never ignited a lightsaber in battle. Others wielded the Force in ways that defied tradition, carving their own paths while remaining true to their calling. Many lived and died in obscurity, their deeds known only to those who stood beside them in their final moments. Some fell before they could leave a lasting mark. Others walked away from the Order entirely, questioning the very ideals they had sworn to uphold. In the end, they were all bound by a single truth. The Force moved through them, shaping their destinies in ways they could not always understand. The Clone Wars changed everything. Before the first blaster shot was fired on Geonosis, the Jedi had already begun to lose themselves. The Order had once been guardians, keepers of balance, sworn to protect life and preserve peace. But war demands sacrifice, and the Jedi, for all their wisdom, were not immune to its demands. They became generals, leading legions of soldiers bred for battle, making decisions that determined the fate of entire worlds. Some embraced their new roles with unwavering duty. Others questioned the path they had been set upon, wondering if the Order had strayed too far from what it was meant to be. And then, with a single command, it all ended. Order 66 turned loyal soldiers into executioners, allies into enemies, history itself into something unrecognizable. The greatest of the Jedi fell in a matter of hours. Some died in battle, cut down before they could react. Others sensed the betrayal before it came, vanishing into exile before the purge could reach them. But the nameless Jedi, those who had never held positions of power, who had never sought glory or recognition, were lost in the destruction. Their stories were erased, their names forgotten. The Jedi Temple, once a beacon of knowledge, burned. The archives that held centuries of wisdom were reduced to nothing. Holocrons were shattered, texts destroyed, teachings lost. The voices of those who had once guided the galaxy fell silent, their presence reduced to little more than whispers in the Force. But history is never truly erased. The ruins of the Jedi remain, scattered across distant worlds, waiting to be uncovered. Their legacy lingers, not only in the holocrons that survived the purge, but in the weapons, the relics, the memories of those who refused to forget. The Empire sought to bury them, to rewrite the past, to frame the Jedi as traitors who deserved their fate. And yet, their influence never truly faded. The Force does not forget those who served it. The echoes of the past remain, waiting for those who are willing to listen. The Jedi Order was more than a council of masters, more than the warriors who stood on the front lines of battle. It was a collection of individuals, each shaped by their own trials, each carrying their own burdens. Some fought against the Sith, against corruption, against the slow decay of the Republic. Others fought battles no one would ever know about, preserving knowledge, protecting the innocent, holding to the light even as the darkness closed in around them. Their names may be lost, but their actions left a mark, shaping the course of history in ways no one ever saw. The figures whose stories are about to be told stood at the edges of history. Some held seats on the Jedi Council, their influence shaping the decisions of the Order itself. Others spent their lives in exile, following the Force to distant worlds where their presence was barely noticed. Some lived as warriors, others as wanderers, philosophers, spies, healers. Some remained steadfast in their belief in the Jedi Code, while others saw the cracks forming long before the Order's fall. Their paths were different, but they were all Jedi. And whether the galaxy remembers them or not, their choices mattered. This is not a story of the most famous battles, nor of the Jedi whose legacies are already set in stone. This is the story of those who stood beside them, who fought their own battles in the spaces between the pages of history. Their names may not be spoken in the same breath as Yoda or Kenobi, but their sacrifices were no less meaningful, their victories no less significant, their failures no less tragic. The forgotten Jedi are not gone. They are here, in the echoes of the past, in the stories that refuse to be silenced. And now, their voices will be heard once more. Ki-Adi-Mundi carried a presence that commanded attention. His towering frame, elongated cranium, and solemn expression set him apart, but it was his mind that defined him. Born on the desert world of Syria, he was one of the rare Jedi granted an exception to the Order's strict code of attachment, allowed to maintain a family due to his species' low birth rate. Despite this, he remained devoted to the Jedi way, never letting personal ties interfere with his duty. Every decision he made was governed by logic and tradition. His dual-brained physiology allowed him to process information differently than most, making him a valuable strategist and one of the most analytical minds on the Jedi High Council. From the moment he ascended to the Council, his presence shaped its deliberations. He approached matters with careful calculation, weighing risks before speaking. His adherence to logic sometimes made him seem rigid, but it was this same quality that made him a steady voice during times of uncertainty. When Qui-Gon Jinn warned of the Sith's return, Ki-Adi-Mundi dismissed it, believing their ancient enemy long extinct. It was not arrogance but reasoning. The Sith had been silent for over a millennium. If they had survived, surely they would have revealed themselves sooner. The war that followed proved how deeply the Jedi had underestimated their unseen enemy. As the Clone Wars erupted, Ki-Adi-Mundi became a general in the Grand Army of the Republic. He did not hesitate. The Jedi had to lead, and he would not falter in his duty. His mind, structured for tactical analysis, allowed him to command the 21st Nova Corps with precision. He was not reckless. Every maneuver, every deployment, was calculated to minimize loss and ensure victory. He fought on Geonosis, his blue blade cutting through battle droids as he led his forces into one of the first conflicts of the war. He survived when many Jedi fell, emerging from the chaos more determined than ever. The battles that followed hardened him. He became a key figure in the Republic's campaigns, leading assaults across the Outer Rim. His experience in warfare deepened his convictions. He believed in the Republic, in the necessity of the fight. Some Jedi questioned their role in the war, but Ki-Adi-Mundi saw it as a duty that could not be ignored. The Republic had to be protected. The Jedi had to stand firm. And so he fought, never wavering in his belief that they were doing what was right. Then came Megiddo. The war had stretched across the galaxy, its battles consuming entire worlds. The icy, industrial wasteland of Megiddo became one of its last battlegrounds. Ki-Adi-Mundi led the 21st Nova Corps against the Separatists, pressing forward through relentless opposition. The siege was brutal, the cold unforgiving, but the objective was clear. The Republic had to take the planet. He moved through the shattered cityscape, his mind assessing every shift in the battlefield. His clone troopers followed him without hesitation, trusting his leadership as they had countless times before. He never saw it coming. The blaster bolts rained down in an instant, tearing through the frigid air. The soldiers he had fought beside, the ones who had stood at his command, turned their weapons on him. Betrayal came without warning. Ki-Adi-Mundi reacted on instinct, deflecting the first shots with a speed honed through years of combat. His lightsaber moved in a blur, but it was not enough. The troopers advanced, pressing forward in unison, their blasters firing with unwavering precision. He tried to reach them, to call out, but there was no hesitation in their attack. He fought, but he could not escape. The onslaught was relentless, his defense faltering under the sheer volume of fire. A bolt struck his shoulder, another hit his leg. His stance wavered. The Jedi had always feared what lay in the shadows, but the destruction of the Order did not come from Sith Lords lurking in the dark. It came from those they had trusted, from soldiers bred for loyalty, from a war they had never truly been in control of. His final moments were spent surrounded by those who had once followed him without question. His lightsaber fell from his grasp as his body crumpled to the cold, lifeless ground of Megiddo. The Republic he had fought for was already gone. The Order he had served had been dismantled in a single stroke. The Jedi had been purged, their presence erased from the galaxy. His death was just one among countless others, but it carried the weight of everything he had believed in. The logic he had relied on had not prepared him for betrayal. The structure he had upheld had crumbled beneath him. The cause he had defended had turned to dust. But the Force does not forget. Ki-Adi-Mundi's story, like so many others, was buried beneath the rise of the Empire. His name faded from the records, his legacy reduced to whispers in the ruins of the Jedi Temple. Yet his presence lingers, an echo in the Force, a reminder of the war that reshaped the galaxy. He had trusted in the Republic, in the Order, in the belief that they were on the right path. In the end, that trust led him to his death, and he was not alone. Kit Fisto carried an aura of confidence wherever he went. There was something about him, an easygoing nature that stood in contrast to the rigid discipline of the Jedi Order. His smile, warm and ever-present, was as much a part of his identity as the green glow of his lightsaber. While others approached war with solemn duty, he met it with calm certainty, a belief that no matter how dire the situation, the light would prevail. It was not arrogance, it was faith, not in the Jedi, not in the Republic, but in the Force itself. Born on the oceanic world of Glee Anselm, Kit Fisto was as much at home in water as he was on land. His Nautolan physiology gave him an advantage few could match: enhanced perception, powerful swimming capabilities, and an unmatched adaptability in aquatic combat. The Force flowed through him in ways that felt almost effortless, his movements smooth and natural, his connection to his surroundings instinctive. Underwater, he was untouchable. He could control the currents, strike with precision, and move through the depths as if they were an extension of himself. His skill in combat was undeniable, but it was his ability to maintain his spirit, even in the darkest moments, that set him apart. The Clone Wars placed him at the center of some of the Republic's most intense battles. From Mon Cala to Kamino, he led Republic forces in engagements where few Jedi could have survived. While others struggled to adjust to the demands of large-scale warfare, he thrived. He understood strategy, knew how to lead, but never allowed the weight of war to strip him of his optimism. Even when the odds were against him, he refused to show fear. His presence alone was enough to inspire those who fought beside him. His mastery of lightsaber combat made him a formidable duelist. Unlike many Jedi, he preferred Form 1, a style often dismissed as outdated. But in his hands, it became something else entirely. The wide, sweeping strikes, the flowing motions, the effortless transitions. It made him unpredictable, his movements difficult to counter. His fighting style reflected his personality, fluid, relentless, always moving forward. He blended technique with raw athleticism, using agility to outmaneuver his opponents. Even against the most fearsome warriors, he fought with a steady calm, never losing his composure. Yet he was not simply a warrior. He was a mentor, a leader, a guide. He trained younglings, counseled fellow Jedi, and never hesitated to offer encouragement. To him, being a Jedi was more than wielding a lightsaber. It was about trust, understanding, and the ability to bring hope even in moments of despair. His presence was a reminder of what the Jedi were meant to be. His final battle was against an enemy unlike any he had faced before. When Mace Windu gathered a team to confront Chancellor Palpatine, Kit Fisto stood among them. He knew the risk. They were not facing a corrupt politician or a fallen Jedi. They were walking into battle against the Sith Lord, who had orchestrated the entire war. The Republic was already slipping away, but if they could strike now, there was still a chance to stop the darkness from taking hold. The moment they entered Palpatine's chambers, everything changed. The Sith Lord moved with impossible speed, cutting down 2 Jedi before they could react. Kit Fisto pressed forward, his blade meeting Sidious's crimson saber in a flurry of strikes. His instincts, the same ones that had guided him through countless battles, told him something was wrong. The fight was not like any duel he had ever experienced. Sidious moved too quickly, too precisely, his attacks laced with power beyond anything the Jedi had prepared for. For a brief moment, Kit Fisto held his ground. His technique was flawless, his movements calculated. But it wasn't enough. One misstep, one fraction of a second too slow, and the duel was over. The red blade cut through him before he could react. The confidence he had always carried, the unwavering belief that the light would win, was shattered in an instant. He fell, his body lifeless before it even hit the ground. His signature smile, the expression that had reassured so many, was gone. The Jedi had spent years preparing for war, but they had never prepared for this. They had always feared the return of the Sith, yet when it happened, they were blind to the danger until it was too late. Kit Fisto had fought for hope. He had believed, even in his final moments, that the Jedi could stand against the darkness, but in the end, the war had already been lost. His name, like so many others, faded into history, his sacrifice buried beneath the weight of an empire's rise. But the Force does not forget. His presence lingers, a reminder of the Jedi who stood against the shadows with courage, skill, and a smile. Aayla Secura moved with a grace that made combat look effortless. Every strike of her lightsaber, every maneuver in battle was refined, precise, almost artistic. Born on Ryloth, she was raised within the Jedi Order, shaped by its teachings from a young age. But her path was unlike many of her peers. Where others learned discipline through structured training, Ayla's greatest lessons came from experience, guided by the enigmatic Quinlan Vos. Her connection to Vos was more than that of a teacher and student. He taught her the ways of the Force, but he also challenged her, pushing her to think beyond what was expected of a Jedi. His unorthodox approach left a lasting impression on her, teaching her adaptability, instinct, and the importance of trusting her own judgment. It was not an easy road. There were moments when the line between the light and dark blurred, times when she questioned the path set before her. But she endured, shaping her own understanding of what it meant to be a Jedi. By the time the Clone Wars began, Aayla Secura had become a commander in the Grand Army of the Republic. She led the 327th Star Corps through the chaos of war, her leadership marked by resilience and unwavering focus. She fought on Geonosis, Ryloth, and countless other battlefields, always at the front, leading her troops with confidence. Unlike many Jedi, she formed a genuine bond with her clone soldiers. Commander Bly, her most trusted officer, followed her through countless battles. There was mutual respect, a trust built over years of shared struggle. Her combat skills were undeniable. She wielded a single blue lightsaber with deadly efficiency, her movements fluid and unpredictable. She favored Form 4, a style that relied on agility and acrobatics, allowing her to outmaneuver opponents rather than overpower them. Whether in open conflict or close-quarters combat, she adapted, using speed and precision to gain the upper hand. Yet, she was not defined by her ability to fight. She was a protector, a strategist, a leader who understood that victory was not won through strength alone. The war took her to Felucia, a jungle world teeming with vibrant life yet shrouded in danger. The dense vegetation, the towering fungi, the shifting terrain. It was an environment that could swallow even the most seasoned warrior. But Aayla Secura had never feared the unknown. She pressed forward, leading the Republic's campaign to secure the planet, unaware that her final battle had already begun. The betrayal came swiftly. The clones, the very soldiers she had fought beside, received a single order. There was no hesitation, no warning, only the cold, precise execution of their directive. Aayla sensed the shift in the Force a fraction of a second too late. Before she could react, before her blade could rise in defense, the blaster fire struck. The first shot hit her in the back, sending her staggering forward. More followed. A barrage of bolts, relentless, merciless, tearing through the air with deadly intent. She did not fall immediately. There was a brief moment where she turned, confusion flickering in her eyes as she saw the faces of those who had once called her general. Bly was among them. The trust they had built, the battles they had won together, it meant nothing now. The clones had no choice. The order had been given. She collapsed to the jungle floor, her blue lightsaber extinguished. The world around her, once so full of life, faded into silence. The war had claimed another Jedi, not through combat, not through honorable struggle, but through calculated execution. The Republic she had fought for was gone. The Jedi Order was shattered. Aayla Secura's name, like so many others, would be lost in the rise of the Empire. Her story buried beneath the weight of war. But the Force does not forget. She had fought with elegance, with conviction, with the belief that peace was still possible. Even in death, that belief lingers. Luminara Unduli carried herself with a quiet authority. Every movement, every word, was deliberate. Her emerald skin and intricate facial tattoos reflected the deep traditions of her Mirialan heritage. But it was her unwavering discipline that defined her. She believed in the Jedi Code with absolute conviction, trusting in its guidance without hesitation. While others wavered, questioning the Order's role in the war, Luminara remained steadfast. To her, the Jedi were peacekeepers, and if war was the price of protecting the Republic, then it was a burden she would carry without complaint. She was a tactician, a strategist who approached battle with methodical precision. During the Second Battle of Geonosis, she led Republic forces alongside Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, coordinating attacks with calculated efficiency. Where Anakin was bold and instinctive, Luminara was measured and cautious. She did not charge forward recklessly, nor did she hesitate when action was required. Her mastery of Form 3, a defensive lightsaber technique, allowed her to outlast enemies who relied on brute force. She would not tire, would not falter. She would endure. Her leadership extended beyond the battlefield. As a mentor, she trained Barriss Offee, instilling in her the same discipline and control that had defined her own path. Their bond was built on mutual respect, a shared belief in the ideals of the Jedi. But discipline without understanding can become a prison, and for Barriss, the rigid teachings of her master became chains she could no longer bear. The war had forced the Jedi into roles they were never meant to fill. The Order had become soldiers, generals in a conflict they could not control. Barriss saw the hypocrisy, the slow unraveling of everything they had once stood for. And so she made a choice, one that Luminara never saw coming. The bombing of the Jedi Temple was a wound that would never fully heal. Barriss, the Padawan she had trusted, the student she had guided, had turned against the Order. The betrayal was not driven by power or ambition, but by disillusionment, a belief that the Jedi had lost their way. It was a painful lesson. The discipline Luminara had taught so well had not prepared Barriss for the reality of war. The trust they had built was shattered in an instant. Luminara did not fight to justify herself. She did not plead. She accepted the truth as it was. When Order 66 was issued, she was stationed on Kashyyyk, fighting alongside the Wookiees and her clone battalion. The clones she had commanded, the soldiers who had followed her into battle, turned on her without hesitation. She had survived countless battles, but against the execution of the Jedi, there was no escape. But her story did not end there. The Empire twisted her memory into something unrecognizable. They took her name, her image, and used it as a weapon. Survivors of the Purge, Jedi who had managed to escape the first wave of destruction, heard whispers that Luminara was alive. Her presence was a beacon in the darkness, a light that promised refuge. It was a lie. Her remains were kept aboard an Imperial prison, her presence manipulated through holograms to lure the last remnants of the Order into the Empire's grasp. Jedi, desperate for hope, followed the signal only to be met with death. Her body had long since perished, but her shadow was a trap that led many to their end. Luminara Unduli had lived with discipline, trusted in the Order, believed in its teachings without question. She had fought for the Republic, upheld the Jedi Code, trained the next generation. In the end, none of it had mattered. The Republic had become an empire, the Jedi had been eradicated, and her legacy had been twisted into a tool for their destruction. But the Force remembers. Though the Empire used her name for deception, her true impact remained. She had been a guardian, a leader, a warrior who never wavered in her belief. And while history may have buried her beneath the weight of the Empire's rise, the truth remains. Luminara Unduli was a Jedi, and she never broke. Barriss Offee was raised to follow the Jedi Code with absolute discipline. She trained under Luminara Unduli, a master whose control over her emotions was unwavering, whose adherence to Jedi teachings was absolute. From the beginning, Barriss sought to emulate her. She was precise, composed, a Jedi who placed logic above impulse. But conviction, no matter how strong, can crack under the weight of reality. The Clone Wars tested her in ways she never expected. The Jedi, once peacekeepers, had become commanders. Their lightsabers, once symbols of protection, were now weapons of war. Barriss watched as the Order drifted further from its purpose, sacrificing its ideals for military strategy, aligning itself with a republic that was slowly rotting from within. The Jedi had always warned of the dangers of the dark side, but she saw corruption growing within the light. Her faith in the Order began to erode. She obeyed her master, followed every lesson, upheld every rule, but doubt lingered. The Jedi were supposed to be above war, yet they sent clones to die by the thousands. They spoke of justice but answered to a Senate full of corruption. They claimed to serve the Force, yet they ignored its warnings. She tried to suppress her frustration, tried to rationalize the contradictions, but the more she saw, the harder it became. It wasn't a single moment that changed her. It was a slow unraveling. Every battle, every pointless loss, every decision made by the Council that felt less like wisdom and more like desperation. Eventually, she could no longer ignore the truth. The Jedi had become a threat to the very peace they claimed to protect. If they would not see it, if they would not act, then she would. The bombing of the Jedi Temple was her answer. It was a message, not an attack. A declaration that the Order had lost its way. She placed the explosives in the hangar, knowing the destruction it would cause, knowing lives would be lost. But she saw no alternative. To her, the Jedi had already condemned themselves. She was merely forcing them to face it. But her plan did not end with the bombing. She needed to ensure that no one would suspect her. Ahsoka Tano, a Jedi Knight whose own doubts had begun to surface, was the perfect scapegoat. Barriss framed her, planting evidence, manipulating circumstances so that suspicion fell squarely on her former friend. It worked. Ahsoka was arrested, cast out by the Order she had loyally served. The Jedi, so quick to speak of fairness, had turned on one of their own without hesitation. Barriss watched as Ahsoka stood trial, as the Council distanced itself from her, as justice became nothing more than a formality. But then Anakin Skywalker intervened. He refused to accept the narrative given to him, pursued the truth with relentless determination. And when he found it, when he confronted Barriss, there was no more room for deception. They fought, lightsabers clashing in the halls of the temple she had tried to expose. She was skilled, disciplined, but Anakin's raw power overwhelmed her. When she was finally subdued, when the truth of her actions came to light, she did not beg for mercy. She did not deny what she had done. Her confession was not an apology, it was an accusation. She stood before the Senate, before the Jedi Council, and told them what they refused to admit, that the Jedi had fallen, that they had become soldiers instead of guardians, that they had betrayed the very ideals they claimed to uphold. Her words struck deep, not because they were lies, but because they were true. The Council, humiliated by its own failure, had no answer. They punished her, condemned her as a traitor, locked her away. But in doing so, they proved her right. Barriss Offee did not turn to the dark side. She did not seek power. She did not crave destruction. She acted because she believed there was no other way. Right or wrong, her conviction remained unshaken. And long after the Jedi Order crumbled, long after the Republic fell, her words lingered, a reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those who refuse to look away. Plo Koon was a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. He did not boast, nor did he seek recognition, but his actions carried weight. Among the Jedi Order, he was known for his wisdom, his measured approach, and the quiet strength that defined him. His breath mask and goggles, necessities for his survival in oxygen-rich environments, gave him an imposing appearance, but beneath them was a Jedi who embodied kindness and integrity. His connection to the clones set him apart from many of his peers. Where some Jedi saw the Grand Army of the Republic as soldiers first, Plo Koon saw them as individuals. He led the wolf pack with an understanding that went beyond strategy or command. He treated his troopers with the same respect he would show any Jedi, knowing that their lives held value beyond the war. They were not expendable, and he made sure they knew it. That loyalty was returned tenfold. The wolf pack saw him as more than a general. He was their protector, their leader, and in many ways their friend. Their battles together forged a bond that made his eventual betrayal all the more painful. Plo Koon's wisdom extended beyond the battlefield. He had an eye for potential, for seeing the hidden strengths in those others might overlook. This was never clearer than when he discovered a young Togruta girl named Ahsoka Tano. He sensed something in her, a spark waiting to be shaped into something extraordinary. Bringing her to the Jedi Temple was a decision that would ripple through the galaxy, setting her on a path that would lead her to Anakin Skywalker, to the Clone Wars, and to a fate no one could predict. Throughout the war, Plo Koon remained a steady force within the Jedi Council. He was not one to seek out conflict, but he did not shy away from it when duty called. His piloting skills were among the best in the Order, his reflexes sharp, his instincts honed through years of experience. In the cockpit of his starfighter, he was as much a warrior as he was a guardian. When Order 66 was given, he was leading a mission over Cato Neimoidia, his Delta 7 starfighter gliding through the skies with effortless precision. His clones flew beside him, men he had trusted, men who had once relied on his guidance. But in a moment, everything changed. The order was clear, absolute. His pilots, the same ones who had stood by him in countless battles, turned their weapons against him. The first shots came without warning, streaking through the air in a deadly arc. He had no time to react, no chance to escape. The blasts struck his ship, and in an instant, the sky that had always been his domain became his grave. There was no fight, no chance to plead or reason, just fire, impact, and silence. Plo Koon had lived by a code of honor and compassion. He had given everything to the Republic, to the Jedi Order, to the clones he had cared for, and in the end, he was destroyed by the very system he had fought to protect. His name, like so many others, faded into history, another casualty of a war that had never truly belonged to the Jedi. But those who had known him, who had stood beside him, never forgot. His legacy was not written in grand battles or legends. It was carried in the memories of those he had guided, in the lives he had touched. The Force had always been his ally, and as his starfighter fell from the sky, he did not fear the end. He had been a Jedi, and that had always been enough. Qui-Gon Jinn was not a Jedi who sought approval. He listened to the will of the Force, even when it put him at odds with the Council. He was calm, yet unshakable in his beliefs. He did not cling to tradition for its own sake, nor did he allow himself to be bound by the rigid structure that dictated the Jedi Order's decisions. To some, he was a maverick. To others, a visionary. But above all else, he was a man of conviction. Unlike many of his peers, he placed his faith not in codes or institutions, but in the living Force itself. He taught his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, to be mindful of the moment, to listen rather than control. He saw the Force as a current, ever moving, ever guiding, and he trusted it completely. That trust led him to many places, some wondrous, some dangerous. and on a distant desert world, it led him to the boy who would change everything. Anakin Skywalker was a child bound by circumstance, born into slavery on Tatooine, but Qui-Gon saw what others did not. He recognized the strength within Anakin, the potential that others would overlook because of where he came from. He believed the boy was the chosen one, the one who would bring balance to the Force. The Council hesitated, unwilling to take the risk. They saw his attachments, his fears, his uncertainty. Qui-Gon saw a destiny not yet written. He was not one to seek power, nor did he desire control over the future. He simply followed where the Force led him. And when it came time to act, he did so without hesitation. But conviction does not guarantee victory, and destiny does not ensure survival. On Naboo, his path intersected with something ancient and unseen for 1,000 years. Darth Maul moved with lethal precision, wielding a double-bladed lightsaber with a ferocity unlike anything the Jedi had faced in generations. Qui-Gon fought with measured strength, his strikes deliberate, his defenses fluid. But Maul was unrelenting. He did not fight with anger alone. He fought with purpose. The duel raged through the palace corridors, every step bringing Qui-Gon closer to the inevitable. He was separated from Obi-Wan, forced to stand alone. And in the quiet before the final clash, he knelt, centering himself in the Force. He did not fear what was coming. He did not regret the choices that had led him here. When Maul struck the fatal blow, Qui-Gon did not scream. He did not curse fate. He simply fell, knowing that his journey had reached its end. But his story did not stop there. His understanding of the Force extended beyond life itself. In the moments before his final breath, he made Obi-Wan promise to train Anakin, ensuring that his belief in the boy would live on. And long after his body faded, his voice remained. Qui-Gon had discovered a path unseen by most Jedi, a way to retain consciousness after death. He would never return in full form, never appear as the others would in time, but his wisdom endured. He guided Yoda, whispered to Obi-Wan in exile, and in the quiet moments between shadows and light, he remained a presence in the Force. The Jedi Order had never fully understood him, but the Force had. And in the echoes of his teachings, his defiance, his faith in what others could not see, Qui-Gon Jinn's legacy remained unbroken. Quinlan Vos was not a Jedi who fit neatly within the Order's rigid structure. He did not sit in the temple contemplating the Force in quiet meditation. His work took him to the shadows, to the underworld, where morality was a shifting thing. He was a Jedi investigator, a tracker, someone who could go where others could not. He did not look like a Jedi, and in many ways he did not act like one, but that did not make him any less devoted to the cause. His gift set him apart. Through psychometry, he could touch an object and see the echoes of those who had held it before. A weapon, a piece of clothing, a simple trinket. Each held pieces of history, moments frozen in time. This ability made him invaluable, allowing him to uncover truths long buried. It also placed him in constant danger, forcing him to navigate the emotional weight of the past while remaining tethered to the present. He was at home in places where the Jedi rarely tread. He could blend into the criminal underworld, speak the language of bounty hunters and smugglers, slip through layers of deception without losing himself, most of the time. The line between light and dark was not always clear, and Quinlan often walked too close to the edge. His methods troubled the Council, but they could not deny his results. His path took an even darker turn when he was sent on a mission unlike any other, to assassinate Count Dooku. It was an order born of desperation, the Jedi realizing that war could not be won through honor alone. Voss accepted, knowing what it would require. To get close enough to strike, he would have to immerse himself in the dark side. Dooku did not just suspect the deception, he welcomed it. He saw the fire in Voss, the hunger for power hidden beneath the surface. He did not try to destroy him, he shaped him. Slowly, relentlessly, he bent the Jedi's mind toward the Sith. For a time, Voss was lost. He turned against the Order, betraying those who had trusted him. He fought beside Dooku, learned the ways of the dark side, gave himself over to the emotions he had spent a lifetime suppressing. He believed he had control, that he could use the darkness without being consumed by it. It was Ventress who pulled him back. She saw something in him that Dooku had not, a Jedi still struggling beneath the weight of his choices. Through her, he found the strength to resist, to claw his way back from the abyss. He returned to the light, but he was never the same. When Order 66 was issued, Quinlan vanished. Unlike so many of his fellow Jedi, there was no record of his death. His name appeared on the Empire's list of surviving Jedi, but his fate remained uncertain. There were whispers, rumors of a Jedi who still worked from the shadows, helping those who could not help themselves. If he survived, he did not seek recognition. He did what he had always done. He adapted, he endured, and somewhere in the darkness, he remained. Yaddle was never one to seek the spotlight. She carried herself with quiet grace, speaking only when necessary and choosing wisdom over force. The galaxy recognized her species through Grand Master Yoda, but few knew the depth of her own strength. She was not a figure of legend, nor did she leave behind a legacy filled with war stories. But her presence in the Jedi Order was significant, her mastery of the Force unique, and her final act one of profound courage. Her connection to the Force was unlike many of her peers. While others honed their skills in lightsaber combat, Yaddle dedicated herself to understanding the deeper mysteries of life and energy. She was one of the few Jedi to master Morikro, a technique that allowed her to slow the bodily functions of living beings, suspending them in a near-death state without causing harm. It was a power that required absolute control, one that could easily slip into darkness if wielded with cruelty. Yet Yaddle used it with compassion, seeing it as a means of protection rather than destruction. She served on the Jedi High Council for years, a quiet but respected voice among the Order's leaders. She rarely spoke unless she had something of value to say, and when she did, her words carried weight. Unlike Yoda, who was known for his riddles and cryptic teachings, Yaddle was direct, her wisdom expressed with warmth rather than mystery. She trained many Jedi in her time, guiding them with patience, always emphasizing the importance of balance, not just in the Force, but within themselves. Despite her high rank, she eventually stepped away from the Council. Some believed she saw the growing corruption in the Republic and chose to remove herself from politics. Others thought she wanted to dedicate her time to teaching rather than governance. Whatever the reason, she remained a Jedi, devoted to the principles she had upheld her entire life. Her path led her to a confrontation that would become her defining moment. When whispers of Dooku's growing doubts reached her ears, she did not dismiss them. She knew him well. She had watched him rise through the ranks, had debated with him in the council chambers, had seen the ideals he once held so firmly. She did not believe he was lost. Not yet. So she followed him, hoping to reach the Jedi still hidden beneath the man who was slipping into darkness. She found him in the underbelly of Coruscant, speaking with a shadowed figure, Darth Sidious. Yaddle did not wait for backup. She stepped forward, alone, confronting the two Sith before her. She offered Dooku a choice, a path back before it was too late. She did not draw her weapon. she did not strike first. She believed words could still make a difference. Dooku hesitated, but Sidious did not. The duel erupted in an instant, red clashing against green, as Yaddle faced the man she once called an ally. She was skilled, but the odds were against her. Sidious watched as his new apprentice tested his strength, pushing Yaddle back, forcing her to defend rather than attack. She fought with precision, countering each strike, searching for an opening that would never come. She nearly won. For a moment she had the upper hand, her experience and mastery giving her the edge. But Dooku was no longer the Jedi she had known. He drew on his anger, his doubt, his fear, and in that moment he struck her down. Her death was not quick, nor was it merciful. Sidious wanted Dooku to feel the weight of his decision, to know what it meant to kill a Jedi in cold blood. And as she lay before them, she did not curse him, did not cry out in hatred. She simply looked at him, her expression filled not with anger, but sorrow. She had tried to save him, but Dooku had already made his choice. Few Jedi were feared by their own soldiers, but Pong Krell was an exception. He was not the kind of leader who inspired loyalty. He demanded obedience through fear. Towering above his troops, his four arms wielding two double-bladed lightsabers, he seemed more like a war machine than a Jedi. His presence alone was enough to make even the most battle-hardened clones uneasy. Where others led with trust, Krell led with brutality. He saw the war as a means to an end, a path to greater power, and he viewed the soldiers under his command as nothing more than tools, expendable and replaceable. His reputation for ruthlessness was known across the Republic, but his campaign on Umbara cemented his place as one of the most infamous Jedi of the Clone Wars. When Anakin Skywalker was recalled from the battlefield, Krell was given command of the 501st Legion. The clones had fought under many Jedi, but they had never served under one like Krell. His orders were relentless, his strategies reckless, and his disregard for casualties horrifying. While most Jedi valued their soldiers and fought alongside them, Krell sent his men on near-suicidal missions, refusing to provide support, ignoring their warnings, and punishing those who questioned his tactics. The fighting on Umbara was some of the most brutal of the war. The world was shrouded in darkness, its native warriors ruthless and well-equipped. Every battle was a struggle for survival, yet Krell showed no concern for the lives of his men. When his officers proposed alternative strategies, ones that would minimize casualties, he shut them down, demanding they follow his commands without question. The clones, who had spent years placing their faith in Jedi leadership, began to doubt whether their general had their best interests at heart. Their suspicions were correct. Krell's actions were not simply the result of arrogance or poor leadership. He had already turned against the Republic in his heart. He saw the war for what it truly was, not a fight between good and evil, but a game of power. He knew the Jedi were doomed, that the Republic was crumbling, and he had chosen his side. He had no intention of leading the 501st to victory. He wanted them to fail, to break under his command. He was sowing chaos, weakening the Republic's forces, and waiting for the moment to betray them completely. His downfall came when his cruelty pushed the clones too far. After leading them into yet another devastating battle, Krell issued an order that would reveal the full extent of his treachery. He commanded his troops to fire on what he claimed were disguised Umbarans. In reality, they were fellow clone troopers. The 501st had been tricked into killing their own brothers. The betrayal sent shockwaves through the ranks. Captain Rex and his men had followed orders their entire lives, but this was different. Krell was no Jedi, he was a butcher. When the truth became undeniable, the clones turned on him. They stormed his command center, determined to hold him accountable for his crimes. But Krell was a force of nature. He cut through his former soldiers with ease, his dual lightsabers spinning through the air in a blur of death. Even surrounded, he fought as if the war was already lost, as if he had nothing left to hide. In the end, it took overwhelming numbers to bring him down. Stunned and captured, he showed no regret, no shame, only arrogance. He mocked his captors, telling them they were nothing, pawns in a game they didn't understand. He revealed his true intentions, to join Count Dooku, to stand beside the Sith and watch the Republic burn. He believed he was destined for greater things, that his survival was inevitable. The clones refused to let him escape justice. After years of following orders, they made a choice of their own. Dogma, a soldier who had once believed in unwavering obedience, raised his blaster and executed Krell where he stood. The monster of Umbara was dead, not at the hands of a Jedi or a Sith, but by the very soldiers he had spent his final days betraying. Before he became Darth Tyrannus, Count Dooku was a Jedi of extraordinary skill, intellect, and refinement. He carried himself with a regal air, his every movement precise, his every word measured. Even as a young Padawan, there was something about him that set him apart from his peers. A sharp mind that questioned rather than accepted, a presence that commanded respect, and a talent with the Force that placed him among the Order's most gifted. But beneath his composure was a restless spirit, one that saw flaws where others saw tradition, corruption where others saw governance. Dooku was born into nobility on the planet Sereno, a heritage he was forced to abandon when the Jedi took him in as an infant. Yet the weight of his lineage never truly left him. It was not simply privilege he had walked away from. It was responsibility, a duty to rule and protect his people. While the Jedi taught him to sever attachment, to serve the galaxy as a whole rather than any one world, he struggled with the idea of turning his back on the place he came from. Under Yoda's guidance, Dooku became a Jedi of unparalleled ability. His skill with a lightsaber was unmatched among his generation, and his mastery of the Force was second only to the greatest masters of the era. He was not reckless like Qui-Gon Jinn, nor was he bound by sentimentality like Anakin Skywalker would one day be. He believed in discipline, in control, in the purity of form. He honed his abilities relentlessly, refining his technique to perfection. But despite his brilliance, there was always a distance between Dooku and the rest of the Order. He was respected, but not beloved. Admired, but not trusted. His disillusionment with the Republic began early. As a knight, he saw firsthand the corruption that spread through the Senate like a disease. Politicians who cared more for their own power than for the people they served. Worlds abandoned by the very government sworn to protect them. Bureaucracy that strangled justice, leaving the Jedi helpless to act. He questioned why the Order continued to serve a system that was so clearly broken. Why they fought wars in the name of politicians who had long ceased to care about the citizens they represented. The Jedi were meant to be guardians of peace, but they had become enforcers of a crumbling regime. The seeds of his fall were planted in moments of frustration and doubt, in the quiet realization that the Jedi Order had become stagnant. They spoke of balance, yet refused to acknowledge that the galaxy was tipping further into chaos. They prided themselves on wisdom, yet clung to outdated traditions that blinded them to the truth. Dooku saw it all, saw the hypocrisy, the arrogance, the decay, and he began to wonder whether the Jedi were truly capable of saving the galaxy. His break with the Order was not the result of a single event, but a gradual erosion of faith. He trained many apprentices, including Qui-Gon Jinn, whose own rebellious nature was a reflection of his master's growing doubts. When Qui-Gon defied the Council and followed his instincts, Dooku saw a kindred spirit, a Jedi who was not afraid to question. But even Qui-Gon remained loyal to the Order, bound by a belief in its ideals, even as he challenged its decisions. Dooku, however, saw no redemption for an institution too blind to recognize its own failures. He left the Jedi, but he did not yet fall. At first, he sought to reclaim his heritage, returning to Sereno to assume his rightful place as Count. He turned his focus to the galaxy's growing unrest, speaking out against the corruption that the Republic refused to acknowledge. Many saw him as a leader, a visionary who recognized the need for change. He became a symbol for those who had lost faith in the Senate, a voice for the countless systems that felt abandoned. But he was no longer bound by the Jedi Code, no longer restrained by their doctrine of non-attachment, of selflessness. He had spent decades suppressing his instincts, resisting the urge to seize control where others faltered. Now, he allowed himself to embrace the truth he had always known. Power was meant to be wielded by those strong enough to use it. It was in this moment of conviction that Darth Sidious found him. The Sith did not turn him with deception or manipulation. He did not need to. Dooku had already stepped onto the path willingly. Sidious merely confirmed what he had long suspected, that the Republic was doomed, that the Jedi were too weak to save it, and that only through power could order be restored. The boy who had once been chosen by the Jedi, the apprentice trained by Yoda himself, had become something else entirely. Not yet Sith, but no longer Jedi. A man who had seen the flaws in both and believed he could carve his own path. The lost Jedi, soon to become the Dark Lord's right hand. Among the ranks of the Jedi there existed those who operated outside the boundaries of tradition. They were not bound to the Jedi Temple, nor did they fight alongside the armies of the Republic. Instead, they moved in the shadows, their existence known only to a select few within the Order. These were the Jedi Shadows, operatives tasked with rooting out the dark influences that lurked beneath the surface of galactic civilization. While the Jedi Code forbade assassination and deception, the Shadows lived in the moral gray, confronting threats the rest of the Order preferred to ignore. Unlike their brothers and sisters in the Jedi Order, the Shadows did not wait for the darkness to strike. They hunted it. They infiltrated Sith cults, dismantled clandestine operations, and erased those who sought to resurrect the ancient ways of the dark side. Many within the Order debated whether their existence was necessary, but the Council understood that threats did not always present themselves in the form of Sith Lords or military aggression. The dark side thrived in secrecy, weaving its influence through crime syndicates, rogue force users, and forgotten relics that carried lingering corruption. One of the greatest dangers the Shadows faced was the resurgence of Sith artifacts. Despite the fall of the Sith Empire centuries before, remnants of their power still remained. Holocrons containing forbidden knowledge, weapons imbued with dark side energy, and ancient texts detailing rituals of unnatural power. Each one carried the potential to corrupt the weak-willed. It was the duty of the Jedi Shadows to track down these relics and ensure they never fell into the wrong hands. But their mission was not simply about destruction. They studied these objects, understanding the mechanisms of corruption so they could recognize its spread before it took root. Operating beyond the reach of the Jedi Council, the Shadows did what was necessary. Some formed deep cover identities, embedding themselves within criminal organizations and Sith cults for years at a time. They walked among the very people they were sworn to destroy, their connection to the light tested every day. Others worked alone, tracking rumors of lost Sith teachings across the Outer Rim, eliminating those who sought to revive them. The methods they employed were not always those of the Jedi. There was no room for mercy when the mission demanded precision, and more than once, a Shadow's actions resembled those of an assassin rather than a guardian of peace. This moral ambiguity made them controversial even among the Order. Some Jedi Masters believed the Shadows risked becoming the very thing they sought to destroy, that their willingness to operate in deception made them vulnerable to the dark side's corruption. Others argued that their work was necessary, that the Jedi could not afford to be passive when the Sith never hesitated to manipulate the weak and desperate. But regardless of the internal debates, the Shadows continued their work, their existence a carefully guarded secret. Despite their efforts, the fall of the Jedi Order came swiftly. When Order 66 was issued, the Jedi Shadows were just as vulnerable as their more visible counterparts. Many were stationed far from the main battlefronts, embedded within criminal organizations or hunting relics in the far reaches of the galaxy. This isolation granted some a temporary reprieve, but it also left them stranded, unable to regroup or warn their fellow Jedi of the betrayal. Those who returned to known Republic space were met with the same fate as the others, gunned down by the very clones they had once protected. Yet, some survived. Unlike the Jedi Knights who had trained in open combat, the Shadows knew how to disappear. Their skills in deception and subterfuge made them more difficult to track, and those who had spent years operating undercover simply remained hidden. They did not gather on remote worlds as others did. Instead, they became ghosts, slipping into the criminal underworld or vanishing into the outer rim. Some sought revenge, turning their blades against Imperial targets in secret. Others abandoned the fight entirely, recognizing that survival meant severing all ties to the Jedi Order. In the years that followed, whispers of surviving Jedi Shadows persisted. There were reports of Imperial officers assassinated under mysterious circumstances, Sith artifacts stolen before they could be retrieved by the Inquisitors, and entire crime syndicates collapsing without explanation. These were not the actions of lost Jedi seeking sanctuary. They were the marks of warriors who had spent their lives fighting in silence and who had no intention of stopping, even as the galaxy turned against them. The Jedi Order may have fallen, but the Shadows had spent their lives fighting alone. And for those who survived, the war had simply changed. Scattered across the galaxy, hidden among desolate landscapes and ancient ruins, stood the forgotten sanctuaries of the Jedi. These temples, some predating the Republic itself, were more than places of worship and meditation. They were repositories of history, knowledge, and power, each one a silent witness to the rise and fall of civilizations. While the Jedi Order maintained its headquarters on Coruscant, countless other temples served as training grounds, research centers, and places of refuge. Some were known only to the High Council, their locations carefully guarded to protect the secrets they held. Others, like those on Ilum, Ossus, and Jedha, had long been integrated into the Order's traditions. Each one contained a wealth of knowledge that, had it been preserved, might have changed the fate of the Jedi. The temple on Ilum was one of the most sacred sites of the Jedi. The ice-covered world, bathed in eternal frost, held the Kyber crystal caves where Jedi younglings undertook their first true test. The Gathering, as it was called, forced initiates to rely on the Force to guide them toward the crystal that would form the heart of their lightsaber. But the Temple of Ilum was more than a ceremonial ground. Deep within its frozen halls lay chambers dedicated to Jedi philosophy, ancient star maps, and texts detailing forgotten Force techniques. It was a place where Jedi Masters studied the deeper mysteries of the Force, seeking answers in the stillness of the frozen world. When the Empire rose, Ilum became a target. Its rich supply of Kyber crystals, harvested for the Death Star's super laser. The temple itself was torn apart, its sacred halls twisted into the foundations of what would later become Starkiller Base. Then there was Ossus, the home of one of the oldest Jedi archives in history. Long before the establishment of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Ossus was the heart of Jedi learning. It housed scrolls and artifacts dating back to the earliest days of the Order, recording not only their victories but their failures as well. Among these were accounts of the 100-Year Darkness, a conflict that gave rise to the first Sith Lords. The Jedi preserved these records not as trophies, but as warnings, reminders that arrogance and unchecked ambition had nearly destroyed them before. When the Empire came, Ossus was left in ruins, its libraries burned, its artifacts looted or lost to time. The destruction of its archives was not just an attack on the Jedi, it was an erasure of history, a calculated move to ensure that future generations would never uncover the truths buried there. On the desert moon of Jedha, the Jedi maintained a temple unlike any other. The Temple of the Kyber, built atop an ancient wellspring of Force energy, was revered not only by the Jedi, but by countless Force-worshipping sects across the galaxy. Pilgrims traveled from distant worlds to walk its halls, hoping to feel even the faintest whisper of the Force's presence. Unlike other Jedi sites, Jedha's temple was not a place of study or training, but of reverence. It reminded the Order that the Force was larger than their teachings, that it existed beyond their doctrine. The Empire saw its value not in its spiritual significance, but in the Kyber deposits hidden beneath its foundations. When the Death Star was tested for the first time, it was Jedha that suffered. The temple, its pilgrims, and the city surrounding it were wiped away in a single blast, reduced to rubble and dust. These were only a few of the many Jedi temples that once dotted the stars. Countless others, known and unknown, met similar fates. Some were abandoned long before the Clone Wars, left to decay as the Jedi centralized their power on Coruscant. Others became tombs, sealing away dangerous relics and the restless spirits of those who had fallen to the dark side. The Empire, under Palpatine's rule, sought them out, not only to destroy them but to uncover their secrets. Imperial forces scoured the ruins, searching for any knowledge that could serve their growing power. Sith cultists, many operating in secret, looted what remained, hoarding artifacts for their own twisted purposes. What they could not claim, they ensured, was lost forever. Had these temples survived, had the knowledge within them been preserved, the Jedi might have stood a chance against their impending doom. Warnings of the Sith's return, lost techniques that could have countered the corruption of the dark side, records of fallen Jedi who had strayed and returned. These could have been the key to preventing the fall of the Order. But the past was buried, its wisdom scattered among ruins and ashes. What little remained fell into the hands of those who sought to rewrite history. The destruction of the Jedi temples was more than an attack on a religion. It was an assault on truth itself. The galaxy was left to remember the Jedi not as the guardians of peace they had once been, but as traitors manipulated by Imperial propaganda. And so, the ruins of their temples stood as silent witnesses to their legacy, waiting for the day when their secrets might once again be uncovered. The Jedi believed that death was not the end. From their earliest teachings, they spoke of becoming one with the Force, returning to the energy that bound the galaxy together. Yet, despite their deep understanding, true immortality, conscious existence beyond death, remained elusive. Countless Jedi Masters devoted their lives to the study of the Force, yet only a handful ever discovered the path to retaining their individuality after death. For centuries, the knowledge remained lost, until one Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn, uncovered what had been hidden. Qui-Gon's journey toward understanding the Force in ways the Jedi had overlooked began long before his untimely death. He rejected the rigid adherence to doctrine that defined the Jedi Order, believing that the Force was a living presence, guiding those who truly listened. The High Council saw his unorthodox views as defiance, but Qui-Gon remained steadfast, trusting the Force above all else. His path led him to the ancient teachings of the Wills, an order of mystics who had long studied the deeper mysteries of the Force. From them, he learned that true immortality was not about preserving the body, but maintaining the spirit, merging with the Force while retaining self-awareness. When Qui-Gon fell at the hands of Darth Maul, he was not lost. Though he could not manifest physically, his consciousness endured. Through the Force, he reached out to his former apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, whispering guidance in the years that followed. His teachings were incomplete, but he had glimpsed a way forward, a way to defy death itself. As the Clone Wars raged, Qui-Gon's presence became stronger. He called out to Yoda, urging the Jedi Grand Master to seek answers beyond the confines of the Order's knowledge. Yoda, burdened by the weight of war and the growing darkness, heeded the call. His journey took him to the ancient world of Dagobah, where he faced visions of what was to come. Guided by Qui-Gon's voice, he traveled to the home of the Wills, learning the secret of becoming one with the Force. Unlike Sith immortality, which relied on unnatural manipulation and the consumption of life, the path Qui-Gon had discovered was selfless. It required surrender, letting go of attachment, fear, and the need for control. Through this, a Jedi could exist beyond death, not as a shade bound to the physical world, but as a luminous presence within the Force itself. Obi-Wan, too, followed these teachings. After years of exile on Tatooine, watching over Luke Skywalker, he prepared for his final moment. When he faced Darth Vader aboard the Death Star, he did not fight to win. He had already won. With a single motion, he lowered his blade and let the Force take him, disappearing before Vader's strike could land. To the Sith Lord, it was a mystery, his former master's body simply gone. But to Luke, Obi-Wan was not lost. His voice guided the young Jedi through the battles ahead, proving that death was not the end. Luke himself would come to understand this power in time. The voices of the past, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Yoda, spoke to him, offering wisdom beyond the grave. When he stood before Emperor Palpatine on the second Death Star, it was their presence that reminded him of his path. He was never truly alone, and neither was the galaxy. Even as the Jedi Order crumbled, their spirits endured. But not all Jedi could achieve this state. Many, even the greatest masters, faded entirely into the Force, their knowledge lost with them. The technique required complete enlightenment, an acceptance of the Force's will without fear or regret. Few possessed the clarity necessary to transcend death. Those who did became the galaxy's eternal guardians, their voices whispering through time, waiting for those who would listen. The Empire sought to silence these voices. Palpatine, who had spent his life mastering the dark side's perverse path to immortality, feared what the Jedi had uncovered. His power allowed him to extend his own existence through unnatural means, binding his spirit to cloned bodies and Sith relics. Yet, for all his mastery, he could never truly achieve what Qui-Gon had. The Sith sought to escape death, clinging to the physical world at any cost. The Jedi, in contrast, embraced it, becoming part of something greater. Even after Luke Skywalker's passing, the echoes of those who came before lingered. The Jedi, once thought extinct, endured not just in legend, but in the Force itself. Their wisdom, their failures, and their triumphs remained, guiding those who continued the fight. To those who attuned themselves to the Force, The past was never truly gone. It lived on, whispered across the stars. Surviving Order 66 was not a victory. For the Jedi who escaped, it marked the beginning of a new kind of struggle, one defined not by battles fought with lightsabers, but by the daily effort to remain unseen. Every ally could become an enemy, every shadow could hide a pursuer, and every moment of peace was borrowed time. The galaxy, once guided by the Jedi's wisdom, had turned against them, leaving the last remnants of the Order scattered, isolated, and hunted. Few of them had prepared for a life without the Jedi Order. Masters who had spent decades teaching younglings now had no students, no temple, and no guidance beyond their own instincts. Knights who had been warriors in the Clone Wars found themselves without an army, without a republic, and without a purpose. Padawans, many of whom had never fought alone, were forced to grow up overnight, learning that survival meant abandoning the very teachings they had once sworn to uphold. The Jedi Code had guided them through peace and war, but it had never taught them how to exist in a galaxy that wanted them dead. Ferren Barr, a Mirialan Jedi who had uncovered the truth about the Sith's manipulations, refused to run. He was one of the few who understood the full scale of what had happened. While others fled, he sought out those still willing to fight, gathering allies and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the Empire. But knowledge alone was not enough. When Darth Vader and the Inquisitors finally found him, Barr's foresight and determination could not change the fate that awaited him. His followers were slaughtered, and he himself fell, another lost voice in a galaxy that had already forgotten the Jedi. Caleb Dume, later known as Kanan Jarrus, was different. He had been a Padawan when the clone troopers turned, and unlike Barr, he had no illusions about fighting back. He did what so many others could not. He ran. He buried his past, changed his name, and disappeared into the fringes of society, living not as a Jedi, but as a drifter, hiding in plain sight. His survival depended on restraint, on resisting the urge to act, even when injustice stared him in the face. He abandoned his lightsaber, forced himself to ignore the suffering around him, and learned to live with the weight of guilt. Every day was a reminder of what had been lost, and every decision carried the risk of revealing his identity. For others, the choice was not so simple. Some Jedi refused to abandon their purpose, believing that the light could not be extinguished as long as they still fought. They became wanderers, rebels, or outcasts. Some sought to rebuild, but every attempt was crushed under the Empire's watchful eye. Others clung to hope, waiting for the day when the Jedi could rise again. But waiting did not mean safety. Even in exile, the ghosts of the past followed them, and the Empire never stopped hunting. Inquisitors scoured the galaxy, tracking down every rumor, every whispered mention of a Jedi in hiding. The hunt was relentless, and mercy was rare. Those who resisted were executed. Those who surrendered faced a fate even worse: corruption, torture, and the risk of becoming what they had once sworn to fight against. A captured Jedi did not die quickly. They were broken, twisted into weapons for the very empire that had destroyed them. The line between survival and surrender grew thinner with each passing day. For many, the hardest choice was not whether to fight, but whether to let go. Some chose to fade into obscurity, burying their past and living out the rest of their lives as mere shadows of who they once were. They became farmers, smugglers, or travelers, never staying in one place long enough to leave a trace. Their connection to the Force, once the foundation of their existence, became a liability, a constant reminder of the power they could never use again. Yet, even in the darkest times, some still found a way to carry on. They may have walked alone, but they were never truly forgotten. The Jedi had always been more than an order or a temple. They were an idea, a belief that the Force would always find a way. And though the galaxy had turned against them, the Jedi who survived carried that idea forward, waiting for the day when the light would return. Throughout history, the Jedi Order stood as the guardians of peace. But not all who trained in its ways remained loyal to its teachings. Some turned their backs on the light, embracing the dark side not out of desperation, but by choice. Their falls were not sudden, nor were they accidents of fate. They were deliberate, driven by ambition, disillusionment, or a thirst for knowledge that the Jedi forbade. The echoes of their betrayals stretched across generations, each failure a lesson that the Order refused to fully learn. Koon was among the first and most infamous of these fallen Jedi. Once a promising student, he was drawn to Sith artifacts and the power they promised. He did not stumble into the dark side. He pursued it, seeking out the remnants of Sith knowledge on Yavin 4. What he found transformed him. Unlike others who fell due to anger or fear, Koon fell because he believed he could master the dark without being consumed by it. That belief was his undoing. He turned against his fellow Jedi, corrupted his own students, and waged war against the Order. His arrogance led to his downfall, but his influence endured. His teachings would inspire dark side cults for centuries, and his spirit would linger, waiting for another to follow his path. Revan was different. He was not consumed by selfish ambition, nor did he seek power for its own sake. He had been a hero, a Jedi Knight who led Republic forces against the Mandalorians. But the war changed him. The Jedi Council had refused to intervene, leaving entire worlds to burn while they debated the consequences. Revan could not accept that inaction. He defied the Council, took the fight to the enemy, and won. But in doing so, he came to believe that the Jedi's cautious approach was a weakness. He sought knowledge from Sith ruins, convinced that strength was the only path to true peace. In time, he became the very thing he had fought against, declaring himself the Dark Lord of the Sith. Yet unlike Koon, Revan's story did not end in darkness. He was captured, his memories erased, and given a second chance by the Jedi. He walked the path of redemption, proving that even those who had fallen could rise again. But his legacy remained a warning. Sometimes good intentions were not enough to prevent corruption. The line between savior and conqueror was thinner than the Jedi wished to admit. Patterns repeated themselves across history. Jedi who sought forbidden knowledge, who questioned the Order's rigid structure, or who believed they could wield both light and dark, often met the same fate. They believed they were different, that they could resist the temptations that had claimed so many before them. But the dark side was patient. It did not need to strike all at once. It only needed a moment of doubt, a moment of weakness, to take hold. The Jedi Order knew these stories well, yet they failed to recognize the warning signs when it mattered most. Anakin Skywalker was not the first Jedi to fall, but he was the one whose betrayal nearly ended the Order itself. Like Revan, he was a war hero, a champion of the Republic who saw the flaws in the Jedi's teachings. Like Koon, he sought out power beyond what the Order allowed. Unlike them, his fall was not only his own, it was engineered. Darth Sidious understood the cycle of betrayal better than the Jedi ever had. He did not need to create darkness where none existed. He only needed to guide Anakin toward what was already inside him. Fear, anger, attachment, the very things the Jedi forbade were the things Anakin could not let go of. And when the moment came, when the choice was laid before him, he did what so many before him had done. He turned. The Order had seen these signs before. They had watched Jedi fall into the same traps for thousands of years. Yet each time, they believed they could prevent it. Each time, they believed their teachings were strong enough to withstand the pull of the dark side. And each time, they were proven wrong. The cycle of betrayal was not just the failure of individual Jedi. It was the failure of the Order itself to evolve, to acknowledge that their rigid ways could not stop history from repeating. Even after Anakin, the pattern did not end. Future generations would face the same temptations, the same choices. The Jedi who came after would look back at those who had fallen and tell themselves that they would not make the same mistakes. And perhaps for a time, they would be right. But the dark side would always wait. It had waited for Exar Kun, it had waited for Revan, it had waited for Anakin Skywalker, and it would wait for the next Jedi who believed they could walk the edge without falling. History remembers the battles that changed the course of the galaxy, the duels that decided the fate of civilizations. But for every legendary clash between Jedi and Sith, there were others, fights fought in the shadows, wars that never made it into the archives, and warriors who gave everything but left no trace behind. These were the battles that shaped the Jedi Order in ways unseen, the conflicts that tested its survival long before the Clone Wars or the rise of the Empire. Some of these lost wars were fought in distant star systems, where Jedi were sent to extinguish threats before they could grow into full-scale conflicts. There were no holo recordings, no grand reports to the Republic Senate. These were operations undertaken in secret, quiet purges against Sith remnants, rogue Force cults, and warlords wielding dark side artifacts. Jedi Shadows, the covert operatives of the Order, waged these hidden wars. They hunted the Sith where the Council did not dare to look, rooting out corruption in places the Republic had forgotten. Many of these battles ended with neither victory nor defeat, only silence. One such war was fought deep in the unknown regions, where an ancient Sith temple, long abandoned, began drawing Force-sensitive individuals to its halls. The Jedi who discovered it found no living Sith, only whispers of dark teachings embedded in the very walls. But the temple did not need a master to spread its influence. The acolytes who gathered there, unknowingly feeding the presence that lingered, were already lost. The Jedi dispatched to destroy the temple never returned, and whatever knowledge was buried within those ruins remained beyond the reach of the Order. Other battles were personal, fought between individuals whose names were never recorded. There were Sith Lords who never took the galactic stage, never commanded legions, but still faced Jedi in duels that could have changed everything. Some of these fights took place in backwater worlds, where a wandering Jedi crossed paths with a lone Sith exile, a confrontation decided in a single moment, leaving one body behind in the dust. There were no witnesses, no records, just the will of the Force, moving unseen. There were Jedi who knew they would never be remembered, masters who trained students in the Outer Rim, away from the politics of Coruscant, only to fall protecting worlds that did not know their names. Knights who left the Order quietly, feeling the weight of its failures, yet still upheld its teachings in their own way. Padawans who were never knighted, never stood before the Council, but whose sacrifices allowed others to survive. In some cases, the Jedi themselves erased these stories. The Order believed in control, in suppressing knowledge that could be dangerous. There were wars they chose not to acknowledge, teachings they deemed too close to the dark side to be preserved. Not every fallen Jedi was spoken of. Not every betrayal was remembered. Sometimes silence was their way of ensuring that history did not repeat itself. But history does not disappear just because it is forgotten. The lessons of those lost wars, the echoes of those unrecorded duels, lingered. One of the greatest lost battles was not one of war, but of knowledge. For centuries, the Jedi sought to erase the most dangerous Sith teachings, destroying holocrons and forbidden texts that could lead their students astray. But in doing so, they severed themselves from an understanding of the enemy they fought. The Sith remembered everything. They carried their histories forward, never allowing knowledge to fade. The Jedi, in contrast, sought to erase the past that frightened them. In doing so, they left themselves vulnerable to an enemy that had studied every mistake they had ever made. There were other conflicts that never reached the surface. Jedi who went rogue but never turned to the dark side, their stories erased by the Council to prevent others from following. There were masters who questioned the Order's role in the Republic, who saw the flaws in the Jedi's increasing militarization and disappeared before they could spread their doubts. Some were hunted down, forced into exile, or quietly removed from history. The Jedi Order was not always kind to those who sought a different path. When the Clone Wars began, the Jedi Order was already standing on a foundation weakened by battles long past. They had fought in ways the galaxy never saw, made choices that history never judged, and lost more than they would ever admit. The Sith had been watching. They had been waiting. And when the time came, they struck not at the Jedi's warriors, but at their weaknesses, their blind trust, their rigid structure, their failure to see what lay beyond their own teachings. The wars that never were did not stay buried forever. They shaped the Order's fate, whether it was acknowledged or not. When the Jedi fell, it was not because of the battles that history remembers, but because of the ones it does not. The Jedi Order stood for millennia as the most well-known organization of Force users in the galaxy. Their temples, their warriors, and their philosophies shaped the very fabric of galactic history. But they were never alone. There were those who wielded the Force outside the structure of the Order, individuals and groups who embraced different interpretations of power, balance, and destiny. Some walked a path of neutrality, others forged their own rigid traditions, and a few rejected the dichotomy of Jedi and Sith altogether. While the Jedi sought to guard peace through discipline and control, many others found the Force to be something far more fluid, a living entity not bound by codes or councils. Among the most enigmatic were the Aayla monks, a reclusive species that viewed the Force as something beyond the duality of light and dark. To the Aayla, the Force was not a spectrum between good and evil, but an endless river of possibilities. They saw it not as a power to be wielded, but as something to be understood through visions and deep meditation. Their abilities baffled even the wisest Jedi, for they could bend time and space in ways that defied all logic. Through flow walking, they could glimpse into the past and future, a power forbidden to the Jedi for fear of altering destiny. The Aayla, however, had no such restrictions. They believed in free will, in the ability of the individual to influence fate itself. Very few outsiders ever encountered the Aayla, and fewer still learned their ways. One of the rare beings to study their philosophy was Jacen Solo, the son of Han and Leia. After the fall of the Empire, Jacen sought deeper truths about the Force, venturing beyond the teachings of Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. He trained with the Aayla, learning that the Force was not simply light or dark, but a vast ocean of shifting energy. But even those insights could not prevent his eventual descent into the dark side. Whether he misunderstood their teachings or simply chose his own path, the Aayla remained uninvolved. They did not judge. They did not intervene. They simply existed as watchers of the Force's great flow. Then there were those who walked the middle path, often referred to as Grey Jedi. This term was controversial, for the Jedi Order itself denied that such a path could truly exist. To them, Any deviation from their strict philosophy was a step toward the dark side. But there were those who disagreed. Jedi who believed in passion without corruption, strength without cruelty, and freedom without anarchy. They did not reject the teachings of the Order entirely, nor did they embrace the temptations of the Sith. They followed the Force as they understood it, refusing to let dogma define their morality. Some of the most well-known figures to be associated with this philosophy were Qui-Gon Jinn and Revan. Qui-Gon's defiance of the Council was legendary. He believed in following the living Force, the raw and present energy that guided individuals in the moment, rather than adhering to rigid laws. His refusal to bow to the traditions of the Jedi made him a controversial figure, though he never wavered from the light. Revan, on the other hand, walked a much darker road. Once a Jedi hero, he led the Republic's armies against the Mandalorians in a war the Council had refused to fight. But war changed him. It brought him too close to the abyss, and he fell, becoming a Sith Lord, before ultimately finding redemption. His story was proof of how easily a Jedi could slip into darkness, yet also how one could return from it. Beyond the Jedi and the Sith, the galaxy was filled with countless Force traditions, each shaped by the cultures that birthed them. The Dathomiri Night Sisters were one of the most infamous examples. They were neither Jedi nor Sith, but witches who wielded the dark side in ways unlike any other. Their magics twisted the Force into something mystical, allowing them to raise the dead, control beasts, and strike with unnatural power. To them, the Jedi were weak and naive, blinded by their rigid views of the Force. Yet even among the Night Sisters, there were those who sought a different way, warriors like Asajj Ventress, who tried to escape the cycle of vengeance that defined her people. The Barandu sages of Dorin were another example of Force users who never swore allegiance to the Jedi. Unlike the warrior monks of the Republic, the Barandu were scholars and philosophers, seeking enlightenment rather than conflict. They believed the Force could be used to sense the unseen, to predict the weather, and to foresee danger. When the Empire rose and the Jedi were hunted to extinction, the Barandu simply faded into secrecy, waiting for the day when the Force would call them back into the open. On the frozen world of Ilum, long before it was reforged into Starkiller Base, Jedi once ventured to harvest their Kyber crystals. But Ilum was not merely a Jedi stronghold, it was a place of spiritual power. The Force resonated in the very ice, and there were those who believed that the planet itself was alive in some way. Ilum was sacred not only to the Jedi, but to others who sought wisdom in the Force. There were ancient records of Force-sensitive pilgrims making the journey to Ilum long before the Jedi Order was established. Proof that the Force had been calling to beings across the galaxy for untold millennia. The Jedi Order was gone, but its presence never truly faded. Even after the destruction of its temples, the execution of its warriors, and the rewriting of history by the Empire, the echoes of the Jedi still lingered. Their names were erased from records, their teachings outlawed, and their symbols buried beneath the iron grip of the Emperor. Yet no matter how much effort was spent to erase them, the Jedi remained, whispered in forgotten corners of the galaxy, etched in the memories of those who once knew them, and in some cases, lingering beyond death itself. The Force did not let go so easily. It carried the voices of those who had come before, ensuring that the knowledge of the Jedi would never be entirely lost. These were not just stories passed down in secrecy. Some Jedi refused to vanish entirely, their spirits manifesting in ways that defied time itself. The most powerful among them, those who had unlocked the secrets of the Force beyond life, returned as luminous apparitions, guiding those who would listen. They were more than mere memories. They were the Force itself, made manifest. Qui-Gon Jinn was the first to breach the veil of death. His belief in the living Force had led him to an ancient secret, one that the Jedi had long overlooked. He had learned that consciousness could endure beyond death, not in the unnatural way of Sith spirits, but as a being fully embraced by the Force. Through deep meditation and understanding, Qui-Gon discovered how to maintain his essence, becoming one with the Force without losing himself. He did not return in a physical form, as some would later do, but as a voice, whispering wisdom from beyond. He guided Yoda when the Jedi Grand Master found himself alone, haunted by failure and the collapse of everything he had fought to protect. He showed Obi-Wan Kenobi the path to survival, not through vengeance, not through power, but through patience and clarity. And later, he would speak to Luke Skywalker, passing on the knowledge that would one day restore the Jedi. The ability to manifest as a Force spirit was not granted to all. It required discipline, a surrender to the will of the Force rather than a clinging to self. Obi-Wan Kenobi, having spent years in exile on Tatooine, followed Qui-Gon's teachings and prepared himself for what lay beyond death. When the time came, when his body fell to Darth Vader's blade aboard the Death Star, he did not die. He simply became something greater. He was there when Luke Skywalker stood at the threshold of his destiny. He was the guiding voice that led him to Dagobah, where Yoda too had learned to manifest in the Force. Even as their bodies faded, their influence remained. They were ghosts, not in the sense of lingering sorrow, but as guardians of a future yet to be written. And yet the presence of the Jedi was not only felt in spectral form. The echoes of their existence stretched far beyond the few who had learned the art of persistence. Even without tangible proof, the legend of the Jedi lived on in the minds of those who had witnessed them. The people of the galaxy remembered. Even under the Empire's relentless suppression, even as Palpatine's enforcers worked to erase every mention of the Jedi, stories persisted. In hidden archives, in the spoken myths of remote worlds, in the fearful whispers of those who had once known the Jedi as protectors, their presence endured. Children still grew up hearing tales of mystical warriors with glowing blades, of heroes who could move mountains with their minds and see the future through unseen power. For some, these were only legends. To others, they were proof that the Jedi would return. The Inquisitors, former Jedi who had been twisted into hunters, spent years tracking down these remnants, not just surviving Jedi, but the stories themselves. They silenced those who spoke too loudly, destroyed artifacts that still carried the Jedi's teachings, and ensured that every last trace of the old ways was snuffed out. Yet, they never truly succeeded. The Force had a way of ensuring that knowledge endured. Fragments of the Jedi Order found their way into unexpected places. The hidden writings of ancient masters resurfaced when they were most needed. Holocrons, long thought lost, were rediscovered by those seeking the truth. Some individuals, unaffiliated with the Jedi but still strong in the Force, found themselves guided by dreams, visions, and feelings they could not explain. The Jedi Order may have fallen, but the battle between light and darkness did not end with its destruction. It was a struggle that had existed since the dawn of time and would continue long after the last lightsaber was extinguished. It was a war beyond flesh and blood. The Sith believed that by wiping out the Jedi, they could ensure their dominion over the galaxy. But the truth was far more complicated. Even as the Jedi were hunted to extinction, the light side of the Force still called to those who would listen. It found Rey on Jakku, decades after the fall of the Order. It called to Ezra Bridger, a boy who had never known the Jedi, yet felt their presence all the same. It remained in Leia Organa, even though she had never walked the path of a Jedi herself. The Sith had always relied on domination and control, yet they could never fully control the Force. It was beyond them. It lived in the hearts of those who believed, in the whispers of the fallen, in the hope of a galaxy that refused to be broken. For every star that burned out, another was born. The ghosts of the Jedi did not haunt the galaxy in sorrow. They remained as reminders, as echoes of what had been, and as quiet guides to what would come next. They were there in the winds of Ahch-To, in the frozen halls of Ilum, in the lost temples buried beneath the sands of Jeddah. They were felt in the resolve of those who still fought for justice, in the dreams of young souls who one day woke up knowing they were meant for something greater. The Jedi were never truly gone. Even as their enemies celebrated their extinction, even as their order lay in ruins, they waited, because the Force is eternal, and so too were its champions.